Welcome to the DFO Rundown podcast with Frank Saravalli and Jason Gregor on dailyfaceoff.com. Delivered by DoorDash.
Welcome to episode 93. Go back in time, the Peter Nedved edition of the DFO Rundown. I'm Jason Gregor. Welcome in Frank Saravalli. Frank, Happy New Year. How you doing?
I'm good. Can't remember, this maybe sounds odd to say, a more anxiety-riddled holiday break. I think everyone was going through this at some point in their house. Do we have our grandparents over? Let's try and not kill our grandparents. All those different conversations, trying to keep everyone safe and healthy through the holidays. It was an interesting time as this variant has spread around the globe like wildfire.
Yeah, do you have rapid tests readily available in Philadelphia?
Yeah, I mean, try and test as much as you can. I think the problem was, and we missed out on so many family members joining us for Christmas because they had COVID. My brother had COVID. My dad had COVID. Almost everyone on my wife's side of the family, they had COVID. And the scary part about the rapid tests here was that people were testing negative for 2 days and then finally testing positive. So it gave some people a false sense of security that, that they had been negative, that they could continue to go out, and even though they were having and experiencing symptoms. So it was crazy here.
Yikes. Well, that's unfortunate. It was only minus 30 in Edmonton basically.
Is that it?
For the entire week. We had a reprieve yesterday of minus 8, which worked out perfect for the farmer and me because I got to feed all my cows as they were empty. But now we're back into the deep freeze for another week again here. It's going to be minus 35 to minus 38 overnight tonight through till Thursday. So it's
I can't even comprehend what that means.
Rare time. It's the Oiler fans think their team's cold. Well, the weather is just as cold.
I was watching the Winter Classic, and it was exceptionally warm on New Year's Day in the Philly area. 63 degrees, I think it hit at some point, which was like setting a record. And so you break out the calculator, it was like -7 at puck drop. There's a 70-degree difference in Fahrenheit between Philadelphia, the New York area, and Minnesota, where the game was being played. It was crazy.
Yeah, no, it kind of a strange time. So, for people who are wondering, for our American viewers, minus 35 Celsius is minus 31 Fahrenheit. So
Fahrenheit, Celsius meet at minus 40. So
just in case they're curious, it's damn cold right now. But there is lots to discuss. Let's start there with the Outdoor Classic. The Wild. Zuccarello didn't mince his words, thought they were terrible afterwards. The Wild have suddenly lost 5 in a row. And hey, even good teams go through dips. They're going through one right now. But what did you make of the Cam Talbot? Did he get hurt in the game, or was he hurt before the game? Because that I don't know, just seemed a little odd.
Yeah, it definitely did, to hear them announce the injury after letting up 6. Did the injury occur during the game, and that helped sort of lead the St. Louis Blues to more goals? Was this something that he had lingering a little bit beforehand that ultimately, did them in this game, and he just wanted the chance to start in the Winter Classic? I guess we'll find out here in the coming days. I think the only disappointing thing for the Wild is just that, aside from Cam Talbot's injury, that they weren't at full strength otherwise. I mean, you take Jared Spurgeon out, you take Jonas Brodin out, Eriksson Ek missed the game as well. That's a pretty significant chunk of the Minnesota Wild to rip off for one game, especially one that they had been building for so long that, you were looking to see, at least in terms of points, 2 of the top teams in the Central. And, the game ends up being a little bit disappointing. The scenery, though, was unbelievable. I thought, for my money, watching at home, that was the best looking Winter Classic that the NHL has ever put on.
Yeah, well, the weather, I always actually think a little bit of cold weather adds to it, and it allows it to look a little bit better, just because you get the feel of the outdoor. The St. Louis Blues showing up in beachwear, I thought was quite funny. I think you have to make it a big event. And so if you're going to be cold, and I don't know if I got to play in the world's longest hockey game, which is outdoors for 240.
That's on my bucket list, by the way.
Consecutive hours. And I can tell you now, we played with all sorts of weather. It started out, it was too hot, so the ice was melting. You couldn't even glide. You had to take every stride, which sucked. And then it got to the point where it was minus 30 some nights. So it is one where it becomes, I think, for players, just a mental one. If it's going to be cold and you got to play the game, you got to think back to when you're a kid. Because when you're kids, I don't know if we just run hotter or we just don't care as much. Because
you just don't care.
Yeah. Kids, you play outside and it's a lot of fun. And I thought the Blues kind of took a really good approach to it to say, hey, you know what, we're going to have fun. And obviously, I'm not saying that resulted in why they dominated, but they went in with a good attitude and it resulted in a good win.
Yeah, no, the attitude was on display from the second they got off the bus, wearing that beach apparel that they did. Really funny given how cold it was. And, it's just interesting hearing some of the stories along the way. Dean Evison, Thompson, Manitoba, way up there. He didn't play any indoor hockey at all until he was age 11. Yeah. I mean, that is legit cold. Someone that's used to it. I was wondering how the fans would cope. That's the coldest outdoor game that the NHL has played. It was even colder than the one in Edmonton back in 2003. And the fans, despite being a blowout, they stayed in the stands. Not only that, but you could see them, jumping up and down, dancing late in the third period of a game that began the period down 6-2 for the home team. And they hung with it. They loved it. So certainly not going to scare off Minnesotans with some cold, but geez, I think if you're a player, you're thinking, I don't know, is this the ideal environment? Some guys loved it. I'm sure other guys probably not so much. The heated benches, extra short shifts in that game.
Well, I'll say this, the Blues players loved it a lot more. The cold doesn't bother you when you're winning 6-2 nearly as much as I would think the Minnesota Wild players, who were just like, let's get out of here as quick as we can. And you know what? The St. Louis Blues, Frank, the only team in the National Hockey League who has a winning record when the other team scores first. The only team in the league. The Blues are good right now, and they're good in a lot of areas. And on the side of the Blues, I want to do that as a segue because they know how to come back, and it's not ideal. Let me get that straight. No, I don't care if you're the league's top team like Washington, or you're one of the worst teams in the league, or a middle of the road team. Most teams are not nearly as good when they give up the first goal. And if you want to look at the Edmonton Oilers' number one reason why they are struggling right now, they've only scored first in 4 of their last 23 hockey games. 4 times.
I wonder if they get a lot, I know you wanted to jump to the Oilers, but there was one thing that struck me watching that Winter Classic as the Blues started to give up some goals in the third period. They had the coaches mic'd up. And so during the timeout, Craig Berube, he was just stressing fundamentals, but then at the end, he had this sort of calming influence. He just said, we're fine, settle down. They had given up a few goals to make it 6-4, and Minnesota had controlled play all period. And you're thinking, okay, maybe this is an opportunity, odd circumstance. They had a ton of chances. Maybe they find a way to tie it up in the dying seconds of regulation. And the whole, we're fine. I thought that was such a strong, 2 simple words, but such a strong message to send to your team that maybe when they're down early, there's no panic then either.
Yeah, well, smart by a coach, right? I think you have to. I think people believe if you give up a few goals, the coach just starts freaking out on you. Well, that doesn't work in any walk of life. So I think most times coaches are going to be calm, and they know how to read their team. If you got a big lead, you give up a goal or two, yeah, it sucks. But having the coach suddenly freak out probably isn't going to be the best plan. And the Blues are a good team right now, Frank. I think quietly the Blues have been the team that, some people thought maybe they would slide back a bit this year, but what are they? They're leading the Central Division now, and they're rolling.
You know who's right behind them in points? The Nashville Predators. Scott Burnside had a story on Daily Faceoff just over the holidays about the Predators' resurgence. And, you look at their last 10, 8-1-1, that team's very quietly been cruising along. One side thought, the Blues put James Neal on waivers yesterday. Is this it for him in the NHL?
Might be, yeah. he makes nothing. So, you wonder with taxi squads and stuff, would a team in COVID, would a team look to grab him? The Blues, the Blues have a lot of depth. They're a top end team. There's lots of guys in the NHL who might not be able to play on a top end team that can definitely play on a middle of the road or a bottom end team. So, because his cap hit is only 750, it does leave me wondering if a team will claim him today.
Yeah, I think I'd be surprised at this point. I mean, he was hurt for a chunk of the year as well. I just wonder what he has left. Given what he's gone through the last few years, it feels like it's been war.
Yeah. Wow. If there's one, the one thing, Neal's conditioning a little bit at times has been something that they questioned. So we'll find out, and who knows if that's how it ends for him in the NHL. It's unfortunate. You always prefer players to go out how they want, not with a tenure in the American League. But at the same time, we've seen some veterans go to the American League, and then the next year they sign somewhere else on a two-way deal and find themselves back in the National Hockey League, because he's not that old. I think he's only 33.
Yeah, he's 30. I think he's 34, and
34.
he hasn't played an NHL game since November 22nd. So out with an injury for a long time. I don't know. I'd be curious to see whether someone grabs him or not.
Yeah, my guess would probably be no. The only reason he might get claimed is because he's only $750K. So
right, it's essentially like signing a player for $750K when you're grabbing him like that.
Yeah, for sure. Now, to the Oilers, you've got Mike Smith comes back for 2 games. Now he's got an upper body injury. It was a lower body before, and he's questionable for tonight. I'd be surprised if he plays. The Edmonton Oilers, 2-6-2 in their last 10. Frank, as I mentioned, they've only scored first in 4 of their last 23 hockey games. And the funny thing is, the Oilers are the only team in the NHL who's undefeated when they score first. The problem is, they've scored first the fewest times of any team. like this team, they're 10-0 when they score first. They're not nearly as good when they don't score. It seems like such an easy thing, but when you look across the NHL, outside of the Blues, and really in the last 5 years, only one team a year is above 50% in points when they give up the first goal. Like, this is a clear, obvious thing. I don't care if you're a good team, a middle of the road, or a crap team. You don't win as much when you don't score first. And the Oilers just can't figure out how to score first more often. They feel their way into games far too frequently.
So let's start with Smith. Like, you're way closer to it than I am. What's your level of concern? I mean, I know the Oilers said day to day, and you said questionable for Monday night's game, but when I'm looking at Smith, 39, turns 40 in a few months, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your level of concern that he can be dependable this season again for the Oilers?
Yeah, you know what, Frank? That's a valid question. I would say right now the odds aren't great. He was out a long time, and he didn't rush himself back at all. There was no rushing back. We've seen guys come back where maybe they're not 100% healthy off a shoulder injury. Didn't do that. Came back, and in the second game, they say it's an upper body injury, but it sure looked to me like when he tweaked something, it was in that late when he stretched out in that game against the Devils, and to me it looked like it was a lower body. They call it upper body, which who knows what it is.
But they also said day to day last time, and he ended up out a couple months.
Yes, 100%.
So that's what I'm saying. Is this a 9 or 10 on the level of concern scale, or is this something lower than that?
For me, I'd probably be around like a 7 to 7.5. It's only because A, he's banged up again, and B, he'll have played 2 games in 2 months. And the longer you go without playing, the harder it is, whether you're 21 or 31 or 41. So, and the other thing is the Oilers just, they can't get consistent goaltending. It's been an issue all season long. And, for when you're starting, your projected starter can't be dependable. Right? Dependability is the best ability, Frank.
Yeah. And that's why I asked you, can you hang your hat on Mike Smith at this point moving forward?
I don't think they can. Right? I think they, that now they haven't recalled Stuart Skinner.
That's why I was going to ask you. Maybe that's the best indicator, that the fact that they went with Konovalov instead of Skinner, that maybe Smith is closer to returning than not.
Yeah. And so that was my number one thing, because especially they're on the East Coast, right? They would have had to call him up to get him in on time, and they still could technically today if they wanted to as the backup, if they know it's going to be serious and he's not going to play today. Because you don't want Konovalov as your backup, because he's not as good as Skinner, right? And
he's not even close.
Edmonton can't afford to go into a game and let's say whatever, Mikko Koskinen suffers a freak injury in the first 5 minutes of the game. And now you got to go to Konovalov, who's not NHL ready at this point for anything I've seen. So,
well, I mean, that's the thing
granted,
is you don't want to go on any extended run with Koskinen as the guy either.
Well, if he wins, they don't care ideally, but you're right. Koskinen's proven he's better as a goalie when he doesn't have to play as much. Once he has to play too regularly, then it doesn't work. Now, here's the thing for the Oilers, Frank. They play tonight, they play Wednesday, but then they had their game on the 8th postponed to the Islanders. So they don't play again until next Monday. Then they have games after that postponed. Koskinen could easily play the next few games for Edmonton because he'd really only have to play 3 games in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. And I guess if there is one sort of silver lining to all these games being postponed, that might be it for the Oilers. But what's the fix? Like I look at the Oilers numbers going into New Jersey. Draisaitl and McDavid, 10 points in their last 5 games combined. Really pedestrian numbers for them. Like how do you get this team trending in the right direction again?
Yeah, the weird stat where I'd love to look up why, Leon Draisaitl in the month of December every year has a little bit of a dip. I don't know why. Now, there's been some people who think it's because Edmonton's the most northern city and there's no daylight, and I don't know how much. I'd have to look at somebody.
Seasonal effectiveness disorder.
Yes,
what do they call that?
Who's far more into that stuff, but it is something when you look at his, because it's not just a one-time thing. It's happened virtually every year. And similar to McDavid and really similar to the entire team, that December, they're not very good. So we'll see. I think maybe they're hoping that changes this season. But when I look at the Oilers' biggest problem, at the start of the year, I said the main concern I had for Edmonton was can they reduce their 5-on-5 goals against? When you look at one of the easiest projectors to look at for good teams is 5-on-5 goals against. There's lots of teams that can be an average 5-on-5 goals for. But if you're a 5-on-5 good goals against team, you got a good chance. And Edmonton, last year, they made a slight improvement down to 2.07. Still not good enough overall, but they have to be under 2. If you want,
where do they stack up this year?
Team, the Oilers are sitting around like 230. It's brutal. They're not good.
And where does that rank league wide?
Oh, I think they're, last I checked, and I didn't check today, but last I checked, they were like 27th. So it's a main issue again for this team, and there hasn't really been an improvement. And then, now goaltending is one reason for sure. I'll say that. But their teams this season, what the Oilers' biggest problem is, their own kryptonite is they will what I call gift goals better than any team. And I watch a lot of games. Edmonton will have 6-7 minutes of really solid play, and then it's one boneheaded play, boom, and the other team gets an easy goal. Edmonton doesn't score a lot of easy goals themselves, right? Like you see highlights of McDavid and Draisaitl, and they're dancing around players. Those aren't easy goals. Those are great high skill goals. Then you go look at Edmonton and how many goals they give up where you just have a brain fart at the blue line. You turn the puck over on a pinch that you don't need to, and suddenly it's 2-1, or it's a 3-on-1, or against the Blues a 2-on-0 for goodness sakes in the first 2 minutes of the game. Like that's been.
What do you chalk that up to? Is that a mental thing or is that a skill thing?
Oh, I think it's mental for sure. Because when you can play long stretches, like look at the Islander game, for instance. The Islander game in the second period, the Oilers said, okay, you know what? Or in the first, we're not giving up anything. And they didn't. The Islanders had very few chances. Then in the third period, the Oilers, they decide to, which made no sense to me. They'd finally taken the lead, and they have one shot in overtime and the third period. In a game, they were leading by 1 goal. And they just kept giving up chances. And it's been an issue, Frank, this year, the entire season. And the thing is, it's every player. So I don't believe it's talent. I believe it's a mental thing. And to me, the Oilers' biggest issue is they might be the most nondescript team in the National Hockey League. Like, no one dislikes them. There's no player on the team who ever irks the opposition. They don't initiate very much at all. And they've got too much of the same. And to me,
is nondescript the right word, or is it? I don't even want to say vanilla because they with some of the high end skill they have. What is it?
Yeah, well, honestly, like to me, maybe nondescript isn't accurate, but I look at it they've got McDavid and Draisaitl who are highly elite, and when they're on, and the funny thing is, the Oilers as a team have scored 5 goals in a game, the most of any team in the NHL by a significant margin, like 4 or 5 times more than any other team. So when they're on, they can go. But Edmonton, to me, needs
But their offense is somewhat average, even in the grand scheme.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's their goals against 5-on-5, which is killing them. And it's been a problem for years, and it really hasn't been rectified.
I mean,
and
but
bottom 6 scoring.
Right. I'm just looking at the overall West and where the Oilers stack up. They're still 5th and almost 6th in the conference in goals for. And that's with the high-powered offense. It's because you're not getting a lot from the other guys when the top-end guys aren't scoring.
Yes. And
the power play's not clicking.
Too often is, their coach says chasing the game, right? Like Edmonton, when they play in front and they have a lead, then other teams have to take more chances, and that's what Edmonton kill you. But Edmonton doesn't seem to have the patience to want to play a tight game consistently. They can play for 6 or 7 minutes, Frank, and then they just throw a grenade basically at themselves, and it explodes, and the other team scores.
You mentioned the Islanders. Are you still out on the Islanders?
Yeah.
They've climbed 100 points in points percentage in the last few weeks.
Sure. But look at the team who's 4th in their conference. The Penguins. They've won 8 in a row.
But that's not the team I'm looking at. All they need to catch is Boston.
Yeah, but even Boston's won their last 2 games. They're up. Boston's up to over 600, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. Boston really only needs to tread water to get in.
Yes. No, I don't. The Islanders, I'm sorry, Islander fans, I just don't see it.
Okay.
I think the Islanders.
I had to ask because they're closing in on the Devils. They're closing in on the Flyers. Pretty soon it'll be Columbus. I just think it's going to be interesting down the stretch.
Yeah. Well,
you need one 8-game winning streak from the Islanders, a reversal of fortunes from when they lost so many earlier in the season. And I don't know.
Yeah. They're 8 back of Boston and they played the same amount of games. That's a lot of points, man.
Yep.
And keep in mind that historically in the NHL, 3-point games become much more prevalent in the second half of the season, which makes it harder to gain ground on teams.
Has there been a less exciting team to make the playoffs than the Boston Bruins this year? I can't, what is that team?
Well, the Bruins their top line's so exciting. And I think the Bruins I don't think the Bruins are really as bad as a lot of people think. They've played so fewer games than most teams, but if you they're above 600. I think they're an okay team. They've had injuries at times. I think the Bruins are a team that will make the playoffs. You're right. They're in a pretty tough division. There's no question about that. So I'm not sure they're going to go very far this year because I don't think they have the depth. They haven't replaced David Krejci is really their biggest thing. They don't have a second line center.
Maybe they'll get him back.
Him and Tuukka Rask?
Maybe. Well, I mean, Tuukka Rask is a near certainty. That's happening. I just wonder about Krejci.
Well, it's very possible. It's very possible that it could happen. I do. Hey, let's go to Vegas quickly. Talking about division leaders, they do lose to the Jets last night in overtime, but
their big loss was Pacioretty.
Jack. I saw I saw the conspiracy theory saying, "Oh, look, Vegas has Pacioretty out indefinitely, just in time to reactivate Jack Eichel, so Pacioretty can come back at the end of the season."
Yeah, I don't know that you take out someone that scored 12 goals in 16 games this season.
I agree.
To get Jack Eichel in.
But it does, they can put Jack Eichel in. There's the $5 million they had to clear out, right? You put Pacioretty on LTIR and you could activate Jack Eichel.
I mean, the math makes sense, but Max Pacioretty has missed more than half your team's games this season, and he's still second on the team in goals.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'm not saying, hey, Frank, I don't buy into it, but I'm just saying people are
well, everyone wants to be the conspiracy theorist.
Yes. And
especially on social media. If you're not doing that, you're not doing it right.
Yeah. Well, we could argue that. I think you're doing it wrong. But when do you think we see Jack Eichel in a game?
I think right before the All-Star break.
So this month?
Yeah, I think late this month.
Okay. Hey, speaking of the All-Star break and the schedule, we've had lots of games postponed. There's likely going to be more postponed. I've talked to some of the Canadian teams and about, trying to fit those games back in the window of the Olympic break. And there's definitely some openings. Some of the cities didn't have, it varies from city to city. Some teams have quite a few things booked. Other teams didn't. So there's options to get those games back in. Do you think the NHL is going to do everything to squeeze in all their games before April 30th, or could we see a week or 10-day extension to the regular season?
They're trying to do everything they can, and they think at the moment that they can. They're pretty confident that they can fit it all in. And I think they've been strategic in terms of how they've decided to postpone games because of some building availability. Like, look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, for instance. They're going to play the Oilers on Wednesday night. And obviously it's a team coming in from the West, so you try and get those games in when you can. The Oilers have been out East for a bit, but it's still going to be played with no fans. And that's still a significant revenue hit, especially for a team like the Maple Leafs. But they haven't postponed that game, not for a revenue reason, but because Scotiabank Arena, when you look at their calendar, has a lot of things going on in February during the Olympic break. So other teams that they've postponed games for, they have more building availability then, and they can squeeze it in. And hopefully the NHL is hoping that the Canadian government can come to its senses. By the way, the lockdown in Quebec, are you kidding me? That they come to their senses and say, hey, we're going to allow fans in at 50%, or we're going to allow fans in at 75%, just to give everyone a little bit more room. There has to be some solution here moving forward. This thing's not going anywhere. I don't understand the continuous clampdown and restrictions. We have to learn to live with it better.
Yeah, well, obviously, I think their fear is overrunning the healthcare system, right? That's the only thing that makes sense to me at this point, and we'll see who's right on that, probably in the next 2 weeks. But I'm not sure. Even in Canada, you've got Quebec doing that, and Saskatchewan is going completely opposite, right? So you've got a yin and a yang in how you approach it, and I do think that there's a lot of people that are done with the going to the extreme of lockdowns. I would say that the vast majority of people are sick of that at all. So, come up with something, because it definitely looks odd where you have some sporting events with no fans and other sporting events are sold out.
Full stadium. Like there are none of those restrictions here in the US. And I'm not saying we're doing it right or doing it better. It just, I don't know. I don't know what the right balance or answer is.
Yeah, it's not ideal. There's no question about that. I think everybody's is tired of it, and hopefully, more people that are vaccinated. The numbers always say that then your hospitalizations go down. So obviously that would be the best.
I think Ontario had a record number of cases again yesterday, and their hospitalization rate actually decreased by 4%.
Yes, which shows you that the vaccine's doing what it was supposed to do. People can get it, and now you don't really have any serious side effects, and you move on, and hopefully that's the case. You're seeing it even in the NHL. We had right before Christmas, Frank, lots of teams were getting 6-7 guys, and now, like, the Rangers had Panarin yesterday, and who knows, maybe there'll be other ones, but it seems like it's even slowed down there, which is hopefully a good sign.
Unless you play for the Montreal Canadiens, who played 11 forwards and 5 defensemen against the Florida Panthers the other day.
And they wanted to, but you know what, Frank? We've talked about, these guys are all used to playing big minutes in their lives. Like, most players in the NHL were always the best players on their teams growing up. They played big minutes. I think for a lot of guys, to do it for 1 or 2 games, I don't think it's an issue. If you all of a sudden,
the Panthers are sitting there saying, hey, we just had to do this. We just played 11 and 5 before the holidays. Don't complain to us. We had one regular NHL defenseman in the lineup in Mackenzie Weegar. I tweeted out that stat in the lineup, and some Habs people were replying and saying, yeah, but look who they had up front. That's not what matters. Doesn't matter their skill up front, and don't blame the Florida Panthers for having better players available to them. That's really what it comes down to, is the guys that you're bringing up. How are they any good?
Yeah, totally true. Right. Totally true. We've seen Carolina played with 16, I think 2 games already this year. Other teams have played at 17. Heck, one of Edmonton's best games is when they played at 17 and we're down a lot of defensemen. So there's really no excuse. Ultimately, you just play the games, and it's a short-term thing and away you go. You mentioned other games like Ottawa's coming out west. None of those games are postponed because that's their only Western road trip, and they just think it's way too hard to get that in. So they are strategically looking at which games can be postponed and which
they're not just saying all Flames games or all Oilers games that are at home. They're not just gonging all those games just to do it. They're saying, what does the big picture look like? How hard will it be to reschedule? What does the building availability look like later to fit it in? And I believe at the moment they have all the games mapped out to where they want to plug them in, and they're pretty confident that they can do it all. The thing is, their only concern is how much more do they still have to postpone? How long are these restrictions going to remain revenue wise? How many more teams are going to pop up where they, get a COVID outbreak and they simply don't have the numbers to play? So they're really kind of waiting to announce that schedule until they know exactly where all the pieces need to fit, because it's a lot harder to go back and undo it again.
I wonder if we're going to see some games that were like for Canadian teams that were road games in April moved to January, and then those home games replaced later on. I've heard that's something they're looking at, just because you don't want to all of a sudden have to try to ram in all of the games with the current games in the months of February, March, and April.
Yeah, no, that's something that they're definitely looking at. Again, part of it has just been fortuitous. You just saw the Habs go on their Florida spell. The Leafs, I'm looking at their schedule here. They're away for a full week. Denver, Vegas, Arizona, and St. Louis. The longer that these teams, the Oilers out east, the longer these teams can go with their stretch of games in the U.S., it's the perfect time to do it, given the capacity restrictions. And I've pointed this out before. It's also not just capacity. It's the fact that concessions are also closed. Yes. No food, no drink. I mean, at a certain point, you're saying, what's the point? What are we doing here? The purpose of any business is to make money. And when you're paying your players millions of dollars and you don't have any cash coming in, it becomes a difficult equation.
Yes, for sure. Now, we're going to get to Tyler Yaremchuk and buy or sell. Then we're going to have a little fun, Frank, as we are into 2022. And we'll talk a little trades after we bring in Ty. Ty, how you doing?
I am doing good. I'm doing very good. Happy New Year to the both of you. Time for a new edition of Buy or Sell, brought to you by our friends over at DoorDash. My resolution in 2022, cook less, and DoorDash will be an important teammate in me accomplishing that goal. You can use the promo code RundownDD. Let's start it off.
Less than zero?
No, there's not. Which bottom feeder? This is the first one. And we're doing it a little bit differently to start things off here. This one isn't a buy or sell, but it's a which team would you buy stock of? The two bottom feeders, Montreal and Arizona. By the end of the calendar year, which team will be closer to becoming a playoff contender? Which team will be closer to being a playoff contender is how I wanted to word that. Which team are you buying stock of out of Arizona or Montreal, Jason?
Oh, my goodness. Geez, I'm getting pennies on the dollar here for sure. And that's a penny stock right now, hit or miss. Well, I'll say Montreal because they have Carey Price, and Carey Price will come back. And there's nothing in Arizona. Arizona's got a bunch of draft picks, awesome, but draft picks aren't helping you for years. So I'll go with Montreal because of Price.
Yeah, that was my reasoning. Is like at least Montreal has a Nick Suzuki, for instance. What are we look like? Who's the comparable in Arizona? Like, who do they really? Well, who do they have to build around?
Brad Lambert, maybe, or Shane Wright.
I mean, you gotta win the lottery to get there.
Yeah,
and there's no guarantee they do that.
Well, I think honestly, both of those guys. I saw the World Juniors, Frank. I don't think there's a clear, obvious like number one. I think there's good picks. I don't think you have to be number one this year to get a good pick.
Well, then I guess you're in good shape if you're the Coyotes. Then is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, wow, they're not in good shape. They're in good shape if you believe that you can get more than one good player in the top of the draft. Yes. Are they in good shape to be competitive soon? No.
Fair enough. All right. Second question, similar, but I'm looking out to the New York area and going with the Islanders or Devils, two teams sitting near the bottom of the Metro Division. Which one of those two teams would you buy stock in over the next calendar year, Frank?
Well, you heard the beginning of the pod, and you know that I'm still not completely ready to declare the Islanders dead. But if I were to buy stock, and here's where the problem lies for the Islanders is they got a lot of guys on long-term contracts. They already have a pretty old team.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be in big, big trouble soon. And, contracts like the one that they had signed. Oh God, I'm forgetting his name. Came over from New Jersey, Kyle Palmieri. That one's going to crush you. It's going to crush you. I would take the Devils. By the way, I still am a little bit baffled by the Jack Hughes contract. Like I don't understand why. Like why you needed to sign that now. But they have pieces. You see the little bit of a heater that Nico Heischer's been on. Jesper Bratt's been really good. Hughes, Dougie Hamilton, I'm buying on the Devils stock.
Yeah, I would agree. When I look at it, you have, basically got Beauvillier and Barzell, and you got Noah Dobson on the back end. You got Sorokin in goal, but the rest of that Islanders team's pretty old, right? For the most part, Wallstrom's another young guy, but the Devils have much younger prospects. And I think Jack Hughes is going to be really good. I agree they might have jumped early on having to pay him right now. I think you could have waited at least till the end of the year, right? Like if you wait till the end of the year, I know.
Let's say he has a point per game season. It's not going to cost you any more than it did.
No, exactly. It's the timing of it. It's not necessarily the cost, more the timing. We'll see if it pans out. But I think the Devils, I like Blackwood in goal. Obviously, Dougie Hamilton's a solid defender. Hughes, Nico Hischier. Yeah, if I'm buying between the two of them, I would pick them. But that division, man, it's going to be tough in the coming years for them to really be competitive.
See, and that was almost my thinking with the Coyotes Habs question as well, is like the Islanders, you could see them going into potentially a rebuild, right? And they got some bad contracts. Like it could get ugly with Montreal if they still have somewhere to go downwards, right? Like if this group isn't getting it done, like Carey Price isn't getting any younger. It's not like he's a guarantee. Like regular season Carey Price might not save you next season.
I also think there's going to be a reshuffling of the deck in the Metro at some point that opens up a window for New Jersey.
Yeah.
I mean, Pittsburgh at some point is bound to go in the other direction. The Washington Capitals, same thing, although Ovi keeps turning back the clock. You've got Carolina and you've got the Rangers that are, pointing straight north, but then there's still got to be room for the Devils in there somewhere.
Now, I'll say this about the Penguins. We thought they were going to go down for years, and they just
no. It's happening at some point. It's either trade deadline this year or it's in the summer. It's happening.
They've won 8 in a row for the time being, so I'm sure no one in Pittsburgh is thinking sell just yet. Third one I have for you, Johnny Gaudreau, 8th in NHL scoring. It's a hell of a time for him to be having a year like he is because he's UFA at the end of the season. Buying or selling on Gaudreau's next deal being worth more than $8.5 million a season, Frank?
I'm selling. Steve Greeley did the calculation for us, who, by the way, begins his new role with the Dallas Stars in a story on dailyfaceoff.com, breaking down all the comps for Johnny Gaudreau. His calculation was that it was somewhere at 7.75 on a 7-year deal. I think it begins with an 8, but if he's getting the term, I don't think he gets to 8.5.
It's a good question, man. Like we just talked about Jack Hughes, and I know that he's way younger, but
Gaudreau is on it. He's going to be one of the most productive players ever to hit free agency.
Johnny Gaudreau is top 10 in scoring pretty much. I know he had 1 year down, but he's done it without, like, when you look, usually it's tandems a lot of the times when top 10 scores, right? Patrick Kane was kind of the exception. I joke that he's the freedom fighter. Well, Johnny Gaudreau is pretty close to that. Like Sean Monahan's a good player, but he's never been a 90-point player. Not even an 80-point player. And I look at Johnny Gaudreau, I'm going to say there are teams, definitely, I believe, outside of Calgary that would pay Johnny Gaudreau 8.5. So I say if he takes less than 8.5, it's because he wants to go to a team where he feels he has a better chance to win. So he's not worried about the 8.5, but I think he'll get 8.5. So
Johnny Gaudreau, just to throw some numbers at you, has 326 points in his last 318 games. So the last 5 years, better than a point per game player.
Yep.
And he's only missed 2 games. So I think there's been some question out there. Oh, how will Johnny Gaudreau's body hold up in the long term? He's a little guy. He's had the same questions his entire career. how's this guy possibly going to hold up to the rigors of the NHL? He's barely missed any games in his career. He's missed like 13 total. So I don't have any questions on my end. He turns 29 next summer. That's really where I think the term might limit the dollars. Like, what does that deal look like in years 5, 6, and 7? But in the meantime, he could end up being a bargain if he's, right in that range.
Fair enough. Yeah, I was really torn over even setting it at 8.5 because you're right. You look at the numbers and you go, the production's just been insane for him and pretty consistent. But then also, cap staying flat. It just makes you think, is anyone going to be able to shell out $8.5 million this offseason, or will a contender?
Here's my other reason why I think it gets 8.5 and above. Last summer, everybody thought, Dougie Hamilton's line was around 8 million. Well, he ended up getting 9, and then every other defenseman ended up going like 9.5, 9.25.
But who has set the market this time around for the forwards?
Well, I think it'll be Johnny Gaudreau, kind of like Dougie Hamilton did.
Potentially. I mean, yeah, he's been crazy productive. I know the Jack Hughes deal, like you said, is different because he's young and it's RFA years and all that. But again, if you're Gaudreau, you're saying, well, I'm not signing for less than a guy who hasn't proven that he can score in the NHL level. I have proven over a lot of years that I can score at the NHL level.
But you need someone to do it, though. That's the thing. You need someone to step up and pay you.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
There's lots of we can just go through the history of free agents and overpay.
Everyone says it only takes one.
Jeff Skinner got 9 million, Frank. 9.
Yeah. But that was to stay, and that was stupid.
Yeah.
Well, never said it was smart.
Yeah.
All right. PointsBet bonus question to wrap up buy or sell. We have seen a ton of goals since the league came back from its pause. The over is hitting. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it's up in the 60% range right now. If you factor in the amount of pushes you would have gotten at the even 6 goals. So tonight, just one game in the NHL. It's Oilers Rangers, Madison Square Garden. The total is set at 6.5. It could potentially be Alexander Georgiev and Mikko Koskinen in net. I'm saying I'm taking the over. Are you guys buying or selling on there being a lot of goals tonight in New York? Frank?
I'm selling. I don't know. Something off with this Oiler team. I don't know. Shesterkin, I don't know. I'm taking the under.
The Oilers and Rangers in November played Firewagon. It was a 6-5 game. I will take the over. The Oilers, you know what? They just had that Devils game. I know the Islanders, but the Islanders are boring as sin. They can't score. The Rangers can play Firewagon, and they'll give up some chances. Yes, I'm going over for sure.
Perfect. There you go. That puts a wrap on the first edition of Buy or Sell here in 2022.
Always like buy or sell, some thought-provoking questions. Frank, we are now into 2022, and historically, there's not a lot of trades in November and December, but you get into January, and especially in the later parts of January, then into February, trades heat up. The obvious team, because I'll go to them because Tyler asked about them in buy or sell, the Arizona Coyotes. We heard Jacob Chikrin's name a lot. I'm not sure how serious it was for him.
I still think that's an off-season transaction.
Yes, I agree. But Lawson Krause is one, and Phil Kessel. They each had 4-point games the other day against the San Jose Sharks. Krause is, he's a big forward. Phil Kessel's got a Stanley Cup resume. He's got a pretty high cap hit, though. What do you make of those two in the desert, and if either one of them will stay there past the deadline?
I mean, if I was anyone playing on the Arizona Coyotes, I don't know that I'd be buying real estate in the Phoenix metropolitan area, given that you may be able to come back later and retire there, but I don't know that you'd be setting down roots for a while. And I think that extends to a guy like Krause, a pending RFA. He's had a pretty productive season for a team that really struggles to score. 15 points in 29 games, so a little better than a half a point per game. There's definitely been some conversation about him that has picked up in the last couple of weeks here. I know there was the holiday roster freeze, and with COVID going on, that really really quieted down any conversations. Managers are just trying to get their teams on the ice. So I do expect trade talk to heat up, but Krause will be a guy that'll be on our trade targets list. Hopefully later this week, we'll have that out on dailyfaceoff.com.
Okay. So on Friday, we're going to focus on that a little bit more, a little bit of a teaser on what's coming up on Daily Faceoff this week. The other thing, Frank, the World Juniors, they're postponed, and there's lots of talk that they'll fire those up again later this year. Same with the women's U18. They'll try to get as many of those tournaments played as they can. But I don't know did you read the story coming out of Calgary with the juniors in Russia and the Czechs getting?
I did read that. Yeah, smoking some cigs. I love it. What are they? Ally Afridi lighting up between periods? Like what? Like what year is this?
Yeah, but it's well, when you're asked not to do it, to stop, and you don't, like, then it's just, like at that point I'm wondering, like, where's the coaching staff, right? Like,
apparently the coaching staff was in business class.
Oh, wow, jeez.
But they were also hauled off the plane because they were part of the group.
Yeah, yes. So it's not that's not a great look. I'll be curious when the World Juniors, if they do get replayed,
do they deserve to be in Canada again? This time, if they replay them. And I'm not saying general commentary as a whole. I'm saying, given what the Canadian government, the pressure that they've put on society as a whole, but particularly now with another sporting event bringing in more teams internationally, I know this is Canada's game and all that. Should it be somewhere else?
It might be, right? I think it'll probably depend on, they want to keep in mind, Frank, you talked earlier about it's a business, right? This one wasn't shut down for health and safety. Let's make that, this was shut down because of business. Mainly, like, that was just as much of a reason. You would have had to cancel more games for sure, because more guys would have got it. That was obvious. It was starting to spread. There's no question about that.
But it was health and safety that was directed by the government. Because the stipulation that was in place from the government was, once someone tests positive, that the whole team needs to be shut down. That wasn't an IHF rule. That was coming directly from the government that they had to negotiate.
Well, are we sure? Because when the Oilers have a positive test, the whole team.
That's different. That wasn't the stipulation with these teams coming in internationally.
Oh, okay. Well, to me, that's part of it. Sure. So the games would have had to be shut down, but make no mistake, the lack of fans, the lack of no food and beverage in the building, I believe, played just as big of a role, right?
But if it really was about business, you had already had the expense to bring everyone here.
Yeah, but you're not recuperating.
And the expense to put on the games. Well, right? But either way, it was sunk cost. You were pot committed at that point. See, I don't buy for 1 second that the reason that these games were canceled is that it's for business. I think they would have preferred to just motor on through and get it over with and get a champion awarded, gold medals distributed, and they couldn't do it. They knew that there was an integrity of the game issue.
Yes.
How do we determine the quarterfinal standings? Who plays in the quarterfinals? Which teams need to be essentially ejected from the tournament because of health and safety protocols? There's no way to really award a gold medal in any fair fashion. That's the decision they came down to.
Well, what if one team would have had 6 cases, right? Are they going to play their all?
No, you're done
with 15 skaters.
No,
that's the point.
But that's what I'm saying. The protocols and restrictions that were put in place by the government, one test should have made them not be able to play. Let alone 6, they had no chance to play. The government wouldn't have let them play. That's the way the protocols were written. So they might have been able to get some sort of special exemption, but the way the protocols were written, they couldn't possibly ice the team.
No, I agree. But let's just say if they had, let's say they had NHL protocols, the way this one spreads, one team gets 6 guys, they don't have a farm system. There's no one they can call in, right? So then the games are screwed. I think that was a part of it, that there were so many factors involved. But to your question, I don't think it will be in Canada. But it
should it be? I'm asking more of a philosophical question. Yeah. They've had 2 cracks at it now. It was supposed to be somewhere else this year.
Yeah, it's going to be somewhere where the federation, whoever it is, if it's USA Hockey or whoever, is willing to foot some of the bill, right? Like, we learned all that. Like, the Edmonton Oilers were the ones who, they foot part of the bill, but they also have the chance to make the money back in food and beverage, right?
Right.
So you've got to have a partner in the United States, let's say, or maybe they go to Europe. But
it's a tough ask. It's a tough ask in the US. Like, there are only so many markets that are interested in hosting something like that,
especially in June or July.
It's right? the number is really small.
Yes. So that's why you have to find places that are willing to put up with the money because they believe they can make it make financial sense.
I just think you need to put it in a place that has a viable chance to actually succeed with the help of the government.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Well, I think By the time June comes, I'm sure there'll be.
Oh my God, we've been saying this for 2 or 3 years now. By the time this date comes, by the time I'm just saying in general, every time we turn around, it's like, oh, well, by then everything will be back to normal. Like, no, it's not.
Yeah, well, but they're learning more. They just changed regulations in some places already, right? Like, I agree with you. It's frustrating as heck, but it goes back to business for me. The World Juniors, all of these tournaments come down to having someone who's willing to put up the money. And it's not IIHF who puts up the money, right? It's the host who puts up the money. So they got to find a host who's willing to do it.
It's tough. It's a tough ask. It really is.
Yeah,
I put what percentage chance do you give the World Juniors for this year actually being completed?
I would say like a 55.
Okay. I was going to say I'm at like 30%.
Yeah, I'd say at 55. They really want to be for a variety of reasons. They don't want to go without having it. But I also know this, Frank, that they won't be able to just have the World Junior. They're going to have to put on the women's U18s and
They
other
better.
tournaments. And I'm curious if they find a way to find a place where they can host both at once.
To me, it's a lot more difficult to do both at the same time. Are you saying in the same place?
Well, no, like let's say you had Edmonton Red Deer, like you could have a split 2 places that, you have half the women, you have one women's group in one place, one men's group in one city, and another city that's close enough is doing the other 2, and then they converge for the medal round.
Yeah, I don't know. That's just more people in one spot that can potentially spread the virus, more hotels you need, more everything. I don't know. It'd be difficult to pull off. It's an interesting idea, but I also think it would be disappointing for the women's game in general that you potentially are having it be overshadowed in the same city by the World Juniors, which is part of the problem anyway.
Yeah, well, but you look at it, well, on a national scale in Canada, when they used to put the Vanier Cup as the same weekend as the Grey Cup, it actually got way more exposure because you had way more people there already covering it, right? So there is the argument that you could get more exposure, and the women's game always talks about, hey, if more people see it, then more people like it. So
yeah, I'm all about that. More eyeballs. I just wonder if that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. I have no idea if that's even ever been discussed, but I want, like, to me now.
There's so many things on the hockey calendar to again put the World Juniors up against the playoffs. Like, I don't know. I don't even know if it's smart.
Yeah. Well,
how many players want to play and potentially could get injured right before the draft? Like, there's a lot of things that go into it.
But when you look at like the NHL draft, first of all, the majority of the World Junior guys are already drafted. They're 18 and 19. There's only going to be a small percentage of draft eligible players playing. And for those that are draft eligible, if they're playing in this tournament, it's a one last hurrah before the draft to showcase your stuff. If you get injured, is it like if you're Brad Lambert or Shane Wright and you get injured? So unless being number 1 or number 2, like maybe you're 3 or 4, does it really change? Like, I don't see a team, because those guys might not even be NHL ready in the fall anyway. When you look at historically how few guys go directly to the NHL, I don't think an injury, because they could have got injured at the World Juniors right now. I don't think it'd be much different.
No, that's fair.
Yeah. So just because there's so few guys, but a guy like Owen Power, if he goes to Buffalo in March, when we assume, right, NCAA season's over, and he plays 20 NHL games, does he go back to the World Juniors? That's the more interesting question for me.
I don't see any reason to.
Yeah.
But
yeah, like Cole Perfetti.
Unless it's something like finishing off something that you started and the chance to win a gold medal. But other than that, it doesn't even feel right. It would feel so. I know there was a Stanley Cup awarded in September. It doesn't feel right to have the World Juniors played in June.
Yeah, no, it's totally valid.
And how many eyeballs? Like, how many people want to watch hockey at that point?
Yeah, it's totally fair. Totally fair question, right? I think it just comes down to, do they feel they can get some money back and recoup it and make some money? And if they do, then they'll have it. Last one, Frank, before we let you go, because we're close to halfway through the season. Is Alex Ovechkin the leading candidate for the Hart Trophy today?
I would say yes.
Yeah, it's hard to argue, man. Like, he's right. You got McDavid,
but you're also asking it at a point in time where McDavid and Draisaitl have not been that exceptional the last few weeks.
Yeah, but they're still first and second in scoring. It's just but Ovi's been with those guys for the last 3 weeks, 1 or 2 points behind them.
Yep.
Right. It's really amazing. Like outside.
That's because they haven't been that exception.
Yeah. But who are the other candidates really? Is there anybody else, or are those the only 3?
I tend to think that they're the only 3 at this point.
Yeah, because I was looking over the weekend. And I'm like there's good teams, but I'm not sure I see another one where there's a guy who's like a clear candidate right now. That's an obvious one. I'm like, maybe I'm missing someone, but
no, I don't think you're missing someone. Like I Kaprizov has been special. Stamkos has been really good. I mean, I don't think this is the year where a goalie jumps up and grabs it. Like Vasilevsky's been great again. Frederik Andersen's been outstanding. Like, but nothing like out of this world that you're pounding the table for a goalie for Hart. Like, I think it's kind of just those 3 guys, and there's such a gap between them and the next group of guys 10 points back that it's kind of a clear-cut cross-section at this point.
Well, it'll be fun. That episode was brought to you by fansfirst.ca. And you can go there because guess what? It's for the fans first. No fees. So when they get back to games in Ontario and Quebec, be the first fan to get your tickets there. 50% in Alberta right now. You can go to fansfirst.ca, get your tickets there, and no fees. That's a huge savings. Only place to do it. Frank, we will talk to you on Friday. Have a good week.